The horses called at dawn, voices sharp with hunger. Inside the ranch house, Cole Dawson heard them through the fever distant. Wrong. He tried to rise. The room tilted. His body refused. Outside, yesterday's hay lay untouched in the trough. No one knew yet that he was dying. The fever had taken him in the night. First the chills, shaking him awake in darkness. Then the fire, his skin burning. His thoughts scattering like spooked cattle. He'd crawled toward the door sometime before dawn, thinking of the horses, thinking of water buckets that needed filling. He'd made it halfway across the floor before his strength gave out. Now he lay there, cheek pressed to cold wood, listening to his animals cry. Grace Porter drove past the ranch at first light, her wagon rattling toward town. She had errands, flour to buy, fabric to pick up from the mercantile. Christmas was 3 days away. She had preparations to make. But something stopped her. The Dawson place looked wrong. No smoke rose from the chimney. No lantern glow showed in the windows. And those horses their calls carried across the frozen morning, frantic and raw. Grace's hands tightened on the reins. She could keep going. Cole Dawson was a grown man, capable and self-sufficient. He'd made it clear these past 2 years that he preferred solitude. The whole county knew he'd shut himself away after his wife died. The horses screamed again. Grace turned the wagon around. She approached the barn first, her breath clouding white in the December cold. The door hung slightly open. Inside, 8 horses stamped and shifted, their water buckets bone dry, their feet untouched from the day before. Fear gripped her throat. Grace turned toward the house. The door was shut, the windows dark. She knocked once, twice. No answer came. She tried the latch unlocked. Mr. Dawson. The interior was cold. The fire in the stove burned down to ash. And there, on the floor between the bed and the door, lay Cole Dawson. One hand still reached toward the latch. Grace knelt beside him, pressed her fingers to his throat. His pulse beat weak but steady. His skin burned like coals. "Lord," she whispered, "help me get him to bed." Grace struggled with Cole's weight, half dragging, half carrying him the few feet to the bed. He was solid muscle and dead weight, barely conscious. When she finally got him onto the mattress, she covered him with every blanket she could find. His eyes flickered open for a moment. Confusion clouded his face, then recognition, followed by something like shame. "The horses," he rasped. "Can't let them. Sarah would never—" He tried to rise. Grace pressed him back down with one hand. "The horses will be fed," she said firmly. "You stay here." She stoked the fire, added wood until heat began filling the room. Then she ran for her wagon. Town was 20 minutes away if she pushed the horses hard. Doc Brennan would come. He had to. The ride felt like hours. She found the doctor at his office, preparing for morning rounds. One look at her face and he grabbed his bag. They arrived back at the ranch just past noon. Doc Brennan examined Cole with practiced efficiency, checking his pulse, listening to his lungs, feeling the heat radiating from his skin. "Severe fever," he said finally. "Could be pneumonia starting. Hard to say yet." He looked at Grace. 3, maybe 4 days minimum bed rest. Someone needs to watch him. And that ranch won't run itself. Cole stirred, his voice thread thin. "Can't ask anyone." "You're not asking," Grace said. "I'm offering." Doc Brennan's expression shifted concern, mixed with something else. Understanding. Maybe, or warning. "Mrs. Porter," he said carefully. "He needs watching day and night. Those horses need feeding twice daily. Water. Stalls mucked. That's a considerable undertaking." "I know how to feed horses, Doc." "I'm sure you do." He closed his medical bag with a decisive click. "But you know how people talk." Grace met his eyes. "Let them. Animals don't wait for gossip to end." Doc Brennan nodded slowly. then turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "I'll check back tomorrow. Send word if he worsens." After he left, Grace stood in the doorway between house and barn. 8 horses watched her with large, pleading eyes behind her. Cole lay helpless in fevered sleep. She looked down the road toward her own cabin, small and empty on the horizon. Then she looked at the pitchfork leaning against the barn wall. A cowboy judges a man by his horse. Her father used to say, "Healthy stock means a keeper." Grace picked up the pitchfork. The choice was made. Grace fed the horses as the sun bled red through winter clouds. They ate like starved things, grateful, urgent. She filled their water buckets from the pump, her hands aching with cold. Each movement felt purposeful, necessary. Through the barn door, she could see lamplight glowing in distant farmhouses. Families preparing for Christmas. Mothers baking. Children laughing. Fathers bringing in wood for fires that would burn through the holy night. She was here. Alone. Choosing this. When the horses were settled, Grace returned to the house. Cole lay exactly as she'd left him, tangled in blankets, his face flushed with fever. She changed the cool cloth on his forehead, added wood to the fire, checked his pulse. His breathing was rough but steady as she worked. Memories surfaced unbidden. Her own husband, dead 4 years now. That first terrible winter of widowhood when the cold had seemed to reach inside her chest and freeze her. Heart solid. She'd thought she might die of loneliness. But the town had carried her. Martha Doyle had brought soup every Sunday. Ruth Barrett had mended her fence without asking. Doc Brennan had refused payment for tending her when she'd caught pneumonia that February. They'd surrounded her with quiet, practical mercy until she could stand again. She'd learned something then. Something the preacher never quite said in church: mercy can't be repaid backward. It can only be passed forward. Cole muttered in his sleep. Sarah? 2 winters? Couldn't save her? Grace understood. He'd lost his wife, just as she'd lost her husband, but where she'd let the town help her. He'd chosen isolation, built walls where she'd opened doors. Easier alone, maybe safer. No risk of owing anyone, but also no life, just existence. The next morning, December 23rd, Grace returned at dawn. The horses nickered in recognition. She fed them, cleaned stalls, checked water, established a rhythm that felt almost natural. When she entered the house to check on Cole, she found him barely conscious but aware. His eyes followed her as she moved around the room. "Why?" His voice was cracked, barely audible. Grace brought him water, helped him drink. "Because you needed help. Don't know me. I know your horses were hungry," she said simply. "That's enough." She left before he could argue. On the road back to her cabin, a buggy slowed. Martha Doyle and Ruth Barrett, watching with sharp eyes. They didn't stop, didn't wave, just looked. Grace felt their judgment like cold wind. That evening, she returned for the second feeding. Another buggy had slowed that afternoon, Edith read, peering toward the house with undisguised curiosity. By tomorrow, the whole town would know. Grace stood at Cole's window, watching lamplight in distant homes. She could stop now. One day of mercy given. Conscience satisfied. Someone else could take over a hired man, a neighbor, anyone but her. Through the glass, she saw her own reflection. A widow, 34 years old, still young enough for judgment to sting. Still vulnerable to whispers about propriety and appearances. She walked back to the barn and lit the lamp. Inside, Cole watched from his bed as her light moved through the darkness, steady, faithful, returning. For the first time in 2 years, he didn't feel entirely alone, and for the first time in longer than that. He was afraid of what that feeling meant. By the 4th morning, Grace knew the horses by name. The bay mare with the white star Bella, the old gelding who nickered softly whenever she entered Sam, the young stallion still full of fire dancer. Cole had named them the way you name family, with care and attention to who they were. Now she fed them like they were hers. The routine had become familiar. Dawn feeding, check Cole's fever, clean stalls. Midday bring soup if he could eat. Tend the fire. Change his blankets when sweat soaked them through. Evening feeding, final check. Then the long, cold ride back to her own cabin. She was exhausted. She didn't stop. That morning. Cole was lucid, truly awake for the first time in days. He watched through the window as Grace carried fresh hay to the barn, her breath clouding white, her movements efficient and practiced. When she came inside, he tried to speak. "Why are you doing this?" Grace hung her coat on the peg by the door. "Because it needs doing." "That's not an answer." She met his eyes. "It's the only one I have." He had no response to such plain truth. What could you say to someone who showed up every morning simply because mercy required it? Thank you felt insufficient. Stop felt ungrateful. So he said nothing at all. That afternoon, Ruth Barrett arrived with Christmas cookies wrapped in cloth. She found Grace in the barn, mucking stalls. "My goodness, Mrs. Porter," Ruth said, her voice sweet as honey over thorns. "You've taken on quite a burden." "The work needs doing," Grace replied. Surely Doc Brennan could arrange for a hired man, or perhaps one of the younger boys from town. Ruth's smile was sharp. "It seems hardly appropriate for a woman of your situation." Grace leaned on the pitchfork. "The horses can't wait for arrangements. Mrs. Barrett, they eat twice daily whether it's appropriate or not." Ruth's expression tightened. "I only mean that people will talk. Dear, they already are." "Let them," Grace said quietly. "I've survived worse than gossip." After Ruth left, Grace sat on a hay bale, suddenly exhausted. Not from the work, from the weight of knowing what this cost. Her reputation, carefully rebuilt over 4 years of careful widowhood, was being shredded with each visit. That evening, Cole overheard her responding to yet another concerned visitor through the window. When Grace came inside to check his fever, he said, "You should stop coming." She paused, cloth in hand. "Why, some people are talking." "I know." "It bothers you?" "Yes." Grace wrung out the cloth, placed it on his forehead. "But it doesn't stop me." "Why not?" She looked at him then, really looked, saw the guilt in his eyes, the shame at being the cause of her trouble. Because doing the right thing costs sometimes. That's what makes it right. Cole closed his eyes. "I'm not worth this." "That's not your decision to make," Grace said. "It's mine. And I've made it." After she left that night, Cole lay awake watching lamplight flicker on the ceiling. 5 days she'd been coming. 5 days of sacrifice he couldn't repay, couldn't stop, couldn't even properly acknowledge because his pride choked every word of gratitude before it could reach. His tongue. "There's 2 kinds of folks," his father used to say. "Those who help when it's easy, and those who help when it costs." The second kind built this territory. Grace Porter was the second kind, and Cole Dawson had no idea what to do about that. The 6th morning, Cole tried to walk. He made it 3 steps from the bed before his legs buckled. Grace caught him, his weight sudden, solid, real. For a breath they stood frozen, his arm around her shoulders, her hands steadying his ribs. Neither spoke. Then Grace helped him back to bed, and the moment passed. But something had shifted in that brief contact. An awareness, fragile as new ice. Cole sat on the bed's edge, breathing hard. "I'm useless." "You're healing," Grace corrected. "I can't even walk across my own room." His voice carried 2 years of accumulated bitterness. "After Sarah died, I told myself I'd never need anyone again. Seemed easier that way. Safer." He gestured at his helpless body. "Look at me now." Grace sat in the chair beside the bed. When my husband died, I tried that too. Being alone. Being strong. She folded her hands in her lap. Nearly killed me that first winter, if the town hadn't helped. But they did. They did. Grace agreed. Martha brought soup. Ruth mended my fence. Doc Brennan sat with me when the pneumonia got bad. I kept trying to thank them, to repay them somehow. She smiled slightly. Martha finally told me, child, you can't repay mercy backward. You can only pass it forward. Cole absorbed this. So I'm the forward. You're the person who needs it now. Grace met his eyes. Someday you'll pass it to someone else. That's how it works. That's how we survive out here. Through the window. Afternoon light slanted gold across snow. Cole watched Grace's profile, backlit and patient. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense, her features too strong, her hands too work-worn. But something in her steadiness drew him like warmth draws cold. The town thinks we're... He couldn't finish. I know what they think. Doesn't it bother you? Of course it bothers me. Grace stood, moved to tend the fire. But bothered isn't the same as wrong. I know what I'm doing and why. Let them think what they want. That evening, Grace lit the lamp in Cole's room, then walked to the barn to light another there. Cole watched from his bed as her silhouette moved through darkness, lamplight following like a benediction. She wasn't just saving his ranch. She was teaching him what home felt like. When she returned to collect her coat, Cole said, Grace. She paused, one hand on the door. Thank you. The words felt inadequate, too small for what he meant. For everything. Grace's expression softened. You're welcome. After she left, Cole noticed her scarf still draped over the chair. He reached for its soft wool, worn at the edges, carrying the faint scent of lamp oil and hay and something indefinably her. He pressed it to his face and let himself feel what he'd been trying not to feel since the fourth morning. Hope. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve. He needed to be strong enough to tell her that she'd become necessary. That the thought of her stopping these visits felt like losing something he'd only just found. He didn't have words for it yet. Just the certainty that if she walked away now, the silence would be worse than the fever. Cole folded her scarf carefully and placed it on the bedside table where he could see it. Outside, the first snow began to fall. They arrived on Christmas Eve morning like a delegation, 3 buggies, 6 righteous eyes. 1 casserole meant his weapon. Martha Doyle knocked twice, firm and purposeful. Grace answered. Flour dusting her hands, she'd been making bread for Cole. Mrs. Porter, Martha said, voice sweet as poisoned honey. We've come to check on poor Mr. Dawson. Behind her stood Ruth Barrett and Edith Red, expressions carefully concerned. Grace stepped aside to let them enter, her stomach tight with dread. The women moved through the house with judging eyes, noted the bread rising on the counter, Grace's coat on the peg, the comfortable way she moved through Cole's space. How domestic. Ruth observed. Martha set her casserole on the table with a decisive thump. We've been discussing your situation. Dear, such a burden you've taken on. Her smile was sharp. We think it's time to arrange proper care. Proper care, Grace kept her voice level. A hired man from town, Edith suggested, or perhaps young Billy Carter could help with the feeding. A boy would be more appropriate. Grace understood perfectly. A boy wouldn't spark gossip. A boy wouldn't threaten reputations. Mr. Dawson is recovering well, Grace said quietly. The horses are fed and healthy. I see no reason to change arrangements. Yeah, but surely you understand how this looks. Ruth's concern was theatrical. Overdone. A young widow, spending days alone with a single man. I'm caring for a sick neighbor, Grace interrupted. Nothing more. Martha's expression hardened. We only worry about appearances. Dear, your reputation is already fragile. This prolonged attendance reflects poorly on you and on him. From the bedroom, Cole heard every word. He lay motionless, hands clenched in blankets, rage and shame warring in his chest. Rage at the town's smallness, their inability to see mercy without dressing it in scandal. Shame that Grace was bearing the weight of his need. Suffering judgment meant for him. He should send her away, protect her from this. That would be the right thing, the honorable thing. But God help him. He didn't want her to go. The women finally left, trailing promises to check in again soon like veiled threats. After the door closed, silence fell heavy as snow. Grace stood in the kitchen, not moving. Then she walked to the barn. She didn't cry, just sat on a hay bale while the horses shifted and breathed around her. For the first time since this started, doubt crept in, cold and insidious. Was she helping Cole or harming him? Was mercy worth this cost? The barn door opened. Cole stood in the frame, pale and unsteady, leaning on the doorpost for support. Grace. She looked up. I heard them. His voice was rough. You should stop coming. I'm well enough to manage now. Are you sending me away? The directness of her question surprised them. Both. I'm trying to protect you. Grace stood, brushed hay from her skirt. I don't need protecting. Cole, I need you to decide, do you want me here or not? The question hung between them. Simple and impossible. Cole wanted to say yes. Wanted to tell her that she'd become the lamplight he navigated by. The reason morning felt worth waking for. But saying yes meant admitting need. Meant vulnerability beyond physical weakness. Meant risking the very thing he'd sworn never to risk again. His silence stretched too long. Grace read it as answer. She nodded slowly, something in her expression closing off. I'll come tomorrow to make sure you can manage the morning feeding. After that, I'll stop. She walked past him, collected her coat, left without another word. Cole stood alone in the barn, surrounded by horses she'd saved, breathing air still warm with her presence. He'd just failed the only test that mattered, and he had no idea how to fix it. Christmas Eve morning broke cold and still. Cole fed his horses alone, struggled with hay bales that felt twice as heavy as they should, water buckets that seemed to fight his grip, but he managed. His body obeyed, however grudgingly. Physical victory tasted like ashes. The barn felt vast and empty without Grace's lamplight, her quiet humming, her steady presence that had become as necessary as breathing. Cole finished the feeding and returned to the house, sat at the empty table, listened to silence press against his ears. He'd chosen this. Chosen pride's familiar prison over Grace's terrifying freedom. She'd asked one simple question. Do you want me here? And he'd given her nothing. Not yes. Not no. Just cowardly silence. A man's true measure isn't how tall he rides. His father used to say, it's whether he can kneel when truth requires it. Cole had spent 2 years standing alone. Time to learn kneeling. At her cabin, Grace prepared for Christmas with mechanical efficiency. Swept floors, dusted shelves, set out the few decorations she owned. She didn't regret helping. Cole would do it again without hesitation. Mercy given was never wasted, even when it cost everything. But she grieved what might have been, if he'd chosen courage over fear, if he'd answered her question with honesty instead of silence, if he'd wanted her presence as much as she'd grown to want his. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Willa May stood on the porch, holding a basket of cookies. The girl was 10, orphaned last spring, living now with Martha Doyle. Her eyes were too old for her face. Mama Ruth said I should bring these. Willa May offered the basket, then noticed Grace's expression. You're sad. Grace tried to smile. Just tired, sweetheart. You miss the horses. The question was innocent, perceptive. Yes, Grace admitted. I miss the horses. Willa May stepped inside without invitation, set the cookies on the table. Mama Ruth says you got talked about for helping Mr. Dawson. Says it wasn't proper. The girl met Grace's eyes. But my mama, before my real mama, she said you did what Jesus would do. Fed hungry things, cared for sick people. That's what Christmas is, she said. Grace's throat tightened. Your mama was right. Then why are people mean about it? Because sometimes people forget what matters. Grace knelt to Willa May's height. But that doesn't make mercy wrong. Remember that. After Willa May left, Grace sat with the child's words echoing in her mind. Fed hungry things. That's what Christmas is. She'd done what was right. Whatever came next. She could live with that. Evening fell. Grace prepared for church service, though she dreaded facing the town. But Christmas Eve was Christmas Eve. Some traditions held even when your heart was breaking. At the ranch, Cole made his decision. He sat in gathering darkness, holding Grace's forgotten scarf, and felt the dam break. Not tears, something deeper. Certainty that burned away every excuse, every fear, every careful reason for staying safe. Some gifts demanded public receiving. Some truths required witnesses. Cole saddled his horse first time since the fever. His body protested but obeyed. He rode slowly toward town through Christmas Eve dusk, through the first falling snow, not to Grace's cabin, to the church. He dismounted outside the white building, its windows glowing warm. Through the glass he saw families gathering, heard the opening notes of Silent Night. I saw Martha Doyle and Ruth Barrett in their usual pew. Saw Grace standing apart, holding Willa May's hand, her face composed but sad. Cole tied his horse to the rail, stood in the snow, breathing clouds of white. His hands shook not from fever but from what he was about to do. The longest ride isn't across the territory. His father used to say, it's from pride to honesty. Cole straightened his shoulders and walked toward the church door, toward the hardest mercy public truth. Cole entered mid-carol. Every head turned. Pastor Hayes paused at the pulpit, nodded, welcome. The congregation watched as Cole walked down the center aisle, boots loud on wooden floor, hat clutched in both hands. Grace's eyes widened. She tried to shake her head, tried to signal him to stop. Spare himself this. But Cole didn't look at her yet. He walked to the front of the church and turned to face them all. Forgive the interruption, Pastor. His voice carried despite its roughness. I have something that needs saying. Christmas Eve seems the right time for truth. Silence settled like snow. Cole looked at the faces watching him. Martha Doyle. Lips pressed thin. Ruth Barrett, curious and wary. Families he'd avoided for 2 years. And Grace, standing near the back. Willa May's small hand in hers. A week ago, I fell ill. Cole began. Fever took me hard and sudden. I couldn't rise from my bed. My horses went hungry while I lay there, too weak to help them, too proud to have asked for help beforehand. He paused. Mrs. Porter found me. She didn't ask permission, didn't wait for invitation. She just came. He could see Grace's face now, color rising in her cheeks. Every morning for 7 days, every evening. Fed my horses, tended my fire, kept the ranch from falling apart while I couldn't. She did it knowing what it would cost her. Knowing you'd talk. Martha shifted in her pew. Ruth wouldn't meet his eyes. I heard some of you had concerns. Cole continued, his voice steady. About propriety, about appearances. He let the words hang. I want to be clear, Mrs. Porter showed me more Christian charity in 7 days than I've shown this whole town in 2 years. If anyone's reputation should be questioned, it's mine for taking so long to deserve her kindness. Someone coughed. A baby fussed. Cole pressed forward. She fed my horses when I couldn't. Kept the ranch running when I'd failed it. Did it knowing you'd gossip? Knowing her reputation would suffer. Did it anyway. His voice roughened with emotion. That's not scandal. Friends, that's Christmas made flesh. That's what we're singing about tonight, Grace, arriving exactly when we don't deserve it. Cole finally looked directly at Grace. Her eyes shone with unshed tears. Grace. He said her name like prayer. Yesterday you asked if I wanted you there. I was too afraid to answer. Afraid of needing someone again? Afraid of what it meant? He took a breath. I'm answering now, in front of witnesses. Yes. Not just for the horses. Not just until I'm well. Yes to tomorrow, and every day after, for all the days God grants me. If you'll still have a stubborn fool who needed fever to see what was right in front of him. The church was absolutely silent. Grace stood frozen. Willa May looking up at her with hopeful eyes. Then Grace released the child's hand and walked forward. She crossed the space between them slowly, deliberately. Stopped close enough that Cole could see the tears tracking down her cheeks. Your horses are family now. Cole. Her voice was soft but clear. So are you. She placed her hand in his. The church erupted. Not in scandal or shock, but in joy. Pastor Hayes grinned wide. Someone started Joy to the World, and everyone joined, voices rising in celebration. Martha Doyle stood, walked to Grace, and took her other hand. Welcome, Grace, Martha said. And this time she meant it. Truly welcome. The judgment broke like fever, imperfect, but real. Cole and Grace stood hand in hand, surrounded by lamplight and voices and falling snow visible through the windows. Christmas arriving right on time, dressed in truth and second chances. Outside, the church bell began to ring. Christmas morning broke clear and cold. Grace woke in her own cabin but arrived at the ranch by dawn. Not to work to be. Cole met her at the barn door, already beginning the feeding. They smiled. Shy as children discovering something new and fragile. Then they fed the horses together. Cole moved from stall to stall, greeting each animal by name. You knew her before I did, he told Bella, stroking the mare's star. Knew she was Mercy arriving when I was too foolish to see it. The horses were sleek and content, living testimony to 7 days of faithful care. When the feeding was finished, they walked to the house. Grace had brought fresh bread. Cole put coffee on to boil. They moved around each other with careful attention, learning the dance of shared space. I have something for you, Grace said, producing a package wrapped in brown paper. Made them last week before she didn't finish. Cole unwrapped it. New work gloves, sturdy leather, carefully stitched. Mine were worn through, he said quietly. I noticed. He disappeared into the bedroom, returned with a small box. Inside lay a key newly made, bright brass catching lamplight. Had it made last night after service. Cole said, seemed important that you could come and go. As home. Grace's eyes shone. She took the key, closed her fingers around it. Home, she repeated, testing the word. They stood in the kitchen, morning light streaming through windows, coffee filling the air with its honest smell. Outside, wagon wheels crunched on snow, neighbors arriving with Christmas greetings. Food, reconciliation. Grace moved to the window, watching families approach. They'll forget they ever doubted. Maybe, Cole said, joining her. But we'll remember that you chose right when it cost you everything. Willa May arrived with the first group, ran straight to the barn to see the horses. Her laughter echoed pure and bright, the sound of innocence blessing new beginnings. Cole and Grace watched from the doorway, his arm resting naturally around her shoulders. I thought I was alone by choice, Cole said quietly. Turned out I was just afraid of owing anyone. You don't owe me, Grace replied. We care for each other. That's what family does. The word settled between them, family no longer frightening. Grace mentioned plans for a spring garden, maybe expand the kitchen plot. Cole talked about buying new broodmares, building up the herd. Separate futures becoming one future, unhurried and natural. They had time now. Evening fell soft and early, winter light fading to blue. Cole and Grace stood in the barn one last time before bed, surrounded by gentle horse breath and the smell of hay. Grace's lamp hung on its hook, permanent now, not borrowed. Cole took her hand. "Thank you for feeding my horses," Grace smiled. "Thank you for letting me stay." They walked toward the house together, their footprints side by side in fresh snow. Through the window, lamplight glowed warm, no longer the cold light of isolation, but the bright warmth of home found, claimed, and cherished. Snow fell soft over the ranch, covering old tracks, blessing new beginnings. Inside the barn, the horses nickered contentedly in the darkness. All was well. All was exactly as it should be.